How did the United States, a nation founded on liberty and representative government, become divided by a devastating civil conflict? The answer lies in the American Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865. The war was the most consequential internal conflict in American history. It determined whether the United States would remain one nation and whether slavery would continue within its borders. Its outcome preserved the Union, abolished slavery, expanded the meaning of American freedom, and profoundly transformed the country's political, constitutional, and social development. The origins of the Civil War developed over several decades. The central issue was slavery, particularly the question of whether it would expand into the Western territories. By the middle of the 19th century, the American economy and political system had become increasingly divided between the northern and southern states. The northern states were becoming more industrialized and urbanized, while the southern economy remained largely agricultural and relied heavily on enslaved labor, especially in cotton production. As the United States expanded westward, each new territory raised an important political question. Would slavery be permitted there? This question affected the balance of power between free and slave states in Congress. American political leaders attempted to resolve the issue through compromise. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while restricting slavery in parts of the Louisiana Territory. The Compromise of 1850 introduced another series of measures intended to preserve the balance between northern and southern interests. However, these agreements provided only temporary solutions. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allowed settlers in certain territories to decide whether slavery would be permitted through a principle known as popular sovereignty. The result was intense political conflict and violence in Kansas. The issue of slavery also reached the Supreme Court. In the 1857 case of Dred Scott v. Sanford, the court ruled that African Americans could not be citizens under the Constitution and that Congress could not prohibit slavery in federal territories. The decision intensified political disagreement and strengthened the growing anti-slavery movement. During the same period, the Republican Party emerged as a major political force. It opposed the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. In 1860, the Republican candidate Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Although Lincoln initially declared that he would not abolish slavery where it already existed, Southern leaders feared that his election threatened the long-term future of the institution. Beginning with South Carolina in December 1860, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union. They formed a separate government known as the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as its president. Lincoln rejected the idea that states possessed a constitutional right to leave the Union. He maintained that the United States was a permanent union and that secession threatened the survival of representative government. The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The conflict was fought between the Union, consisting primarily of the northern states, and the Confederacy, formed by the seceding southern states. At the beginning of the war, both sides expected the conflict to be relatively short. Instead, it lasted 4 years and mobilized vast military, economic, and human resources. The Union possessed several important advantages. It had a larger population, greater industrial capacity, a more extensive railroad network, and a stronger navy. The Confederacy, however, fought primarily on familiar territory and possessed experienced military commanders. Among the most prominent Confederate generals was Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. The Union was led politically by President Abraham Lincoln and militarily, during the later stages of the war, by General Ulysses S. Grant. The war was fought across several major regions. In the Eastern Theater, important battles occurred in Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. In the Western Theater, Union forces sought control of the Mississippi River and key transportation routes. One of the bloodiest battles occurred at Antietam in Maryland in September 1862. The battle ended Lee's first invasion of the North and provided Lincoln with an opportunity to announce a major change in the purpose of the war. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation declared enslaved people in the states rebelling against the Union to be free. It transformed the Civil War from a struggle primarily concerned with preserving the Union into a struggle also directed toward ending slavery. The proclamation did not immediately free every enslaved person, but it changed the moral and political character of the conflict. It also allowed African American men to enlist in the Union Armed Forces. Approximately 180,000 African American soldiers served in the Union Army, while thousands of others served in the Navy. Their participation made a major contribution to the Union war effort and strengthened the cause of emancipation. The year 1863 marked an important turning point. In July, Union forces defeated Lee's army at the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. The battle was one of the largest and most significant military confrontations of the war. At approximately the same time, Union forces captured Vicksburg, Mississippi. This victory gave the Union control of the Mississippi River and divided the Confederacy geographically. Several months later, Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. In this brief but influential speech, he described the United States as a nation founded on liberty and equality. He presented the war as a test of whether democratic government could survive, and called for what he described as a new birth of freedom. During the final years of the conflict, General Ulysses S. Grant became the commanding general of the Union armies. Grant coordinated military operations across several fronts, while General William Tecumseh Sherman led a major campaign through Georgia and the Carolinas. By 1865, the Confederacy's military position had become increasingly difficult to maintain. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Although other Confederate forces surrendered later, the meeting at Appomattox effectively marked the end of the Civil War. Only 5 days later, President Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln's death occurred just as the country was preparing to reunify and begin the difficult process of national reconstruction. The Civil War produced major constitutional changes. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery throughout the United States. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, established national citizenship and guaranteed equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, prohibited the denial of voting rights on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Together, these amendments significantly expanded the constitutional meaning of freedom, citizenship, and equality. The war also strengthened the authority of the federal government and confirmed that the United States was a permanent national union. In the years following the war, the country entered the period known as Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, the United States sought to reintegrate the former Confederate states, rebuild the South, establish new state governments, and define the legal and political status of formerly enslaved people. The American Civil War was a decisive turning point in the history of the United States. It preserved the Union, abolished slavery, strengthened federal authority, and transformed the nation's constitutional order. The war also redefined the meaning of American democracy. The principles of liberty and equality expressed in the Declaration of Independence became more firmly incorporated into the Constitution through the Reconstruction Amendments. The enduring significance of the Civil War lies in its transformation of the United States from a union that permitted slavery into a nation constitutionally committed to freedom, citizenship, and equal protection under the law. It remains essential to understanding American history, national identity, civil rights, and the continuing development of American democracy.